It's not as if she were a maniac, a raving thing. She just goes a little mad sometimes.
And I say, insect or man, death should always be painless.
She just goes a little mad sometimes. We all go a little mad sometimes.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
I caught him, Sheriff. Wait, who is it? Billy Loomis. Sir.
Pardon me, I'm Loomis, Dr. Sam Loomis.
I think our friend Sam Loomis didn't know that Marion was here.
Oh, Sam, I hate having to be with you in a place like this.
Just listen to me. When you go down the street to the Mackenzie's house, I want you to tell them to call the police.
In the car. Drive down to the Mackenzies. We must be mad. Literally mad.
Watch a few movies, take a few notes. It was fun.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 76th, I have checked, 76th episode of Double Feature Horror Show. I hope you're all fine this evening. This is going to be an interesting one. We got a lot to cover, slightly off the usual format, but I think you're going to like it. We've also shaken it up a bit. We do not currently have TCG or Harrian with us. Harrian, I just know, well, he really enjoyed Perfect Blue. I don't know what a maid cafe is, but he's off. He sounded really exciting about it. So maybe we'll get him next week. And TCG, I'm afraid, is unavailable, but he is going to be doing a freaking Florida Man Friday one tomorrow, which I'm going to be on. So I will shill for him early. But they're not even here. They don't deserve the shill. Instead, we'll focus on our wonderful guest. Amy, how are you doing?
Hi, doing well, thank you. I'm happy to be on.
It's an absolute pleasure. I said to you before we came on, I enjoyed seeing you on Women's Hour, and you mentioned a certain appreciation of a certain author. And I think I fired you a DM pretty much as soon as I saw that.
I think an infatuation would be more appropriate.
Oh, excellent. I good. There has been some controversial scoring for this film coming in. So I want infatuation. We're going to round this bad boy up. Yes. And we also have Waifu with us. How are you doing, Waifu?
Yeah, not too bad. Today I'm renamed Psychic Lesbian Waifu in honour of Theo in the film. But yeah, not too bad.
Excellent.
I'm loving the tale of Harrian's travels.
He's out and about, and increasingly out, I should say.
Glad to hear it.
There's a funny thing with what we're covering tonight, isn't there, Waifu? A little bit of reminiscing.
Yeah. If anyone's heard Horrorshow talk about her horror syllabus before, The Haunting, 1963, is the first film in the syllabus. And so, in fact, this was the first proper horror film that Chloe ever showed me in one of our very early dates. I think the only other two horror films I'd actually seen before that were the M. Night Shyamalan The Village, and is it Hide and Seek with Robert Nero?
I'm afraid it is. It is indeed. And Dakota Fanning. No, yes. The other one. Is it? Yes, Dakota Fanning.
So yes, this was my introduction to proper horror films whilst paying attention.
Yeah, you said, this sounds good. Hey, what about some of these modern horror films you like? And I was like, okay, cool, yeah. Before that, we have to go back to the 60s, just so you understand the context. And weirdly, you didn't leave me. So
I'm very patient.
Yeah, there is something I want to get to before we go into the more planned content. I want to say a special thing. There's a bit of a star here. Weird Sister, thank you so much. You dropped this pre-stream. I know you can't be here for this one, and you have trouble with the timing, but you've absolutely spoiled me there. and I very much appreciate it. So thank you so much for dropping an absolute massive super chat. You caught me out. I was surprised. If I had a monocle, it would have popped. And yeah, you take that as a good sign. I'm so glad that you've pitched in for the for the secret project. I don't know if I said the title actually. I'm still thinking of The Last Blockbuster Left, but shoot over the last house on the left thing. That's what I'm aiming for at the moment. But yeah, it's absolutely amazing you did that. I've been getting requests from people who are channel members to cover a film that they're particularly interested in. And there's no way with that level, like, message, say a film you want covered, we will do it. Okay. And yeah, thank you again. Really appreciate that. Yeah, that was quite a lovely way to start the stream. I'm not going to lie.
Very generous of him or her. Weird sister, so I'm assuming it's a her.
In these times, you can tell.
Yes. Very, very confusing. All sorts of degeneracy abounds, honestly. Okay. So before we get into The Haunting, which I'm so excited to talk about, this is one of those films where I have I'm just so happy to introduce it to people. It's kind of outside of people's regular ranges. You know, I don't know if, Amy, if you have this thing, because I think you're open to a lot more than most people. But when you are looking for a film or something, just the range you would consider can be quite limited. Like, people will even say, oh, I don't know, film from the 90s? I don't know.
Yeah.
And you subconsciously, you sort of write them off.
I do have a tendency to just like take a particular intense dislike of certain things. It just is in my nature. But yeah, I guess that the things that I do like are quite like dispersed, I guess, pretty idiosyncratic. So yeah, I understand that.
I approve of it. And yeah, so this is one, I think it's going to be outside of a lot of people's wheelhouse. It's going to be something that they'd passed over, thought, 1963, I don't know. That's pretty old. But I got introduced to it a long time ago. I absolutely loved it. It blew me away, and it's doing something incredibly interesting. So I think you're going to love it. And because, Amy, you know the book so well, I think there are some interesting changes. Even though it's quite close, there are some interesting shifts, especially around the character of the wife. And I'll be
a lot of the plot differences are obviously that was changed a lot, but then a lot of the dialogue is taken directly from the book, so it's an interesting combination.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, that's going to be interesting. But before we get into that, I'll just say hi, chat. I see you rolling in. It's good to see beloved regulars in. Good to see you, Needle and Fur, Devonte. Good to see you. I see you liked this. I'm really pleased. Slim, good to see you. We have Maverick in. We have Fez. Good to see you. Alabaster, good to see you again. I hope you've enjoyed it. Enjoyed the horror homework. And John Goris, good to see you. Yeah. Classiness, absolutely. Great framing of it. Before we want to go on to that, when we're talking about things that we consider watching or not, it just made me think that there's a brief tangent that I want to go on to. And this might be a weird stream because we have some tangents, but this is the first one I wanted to cover. And it's the matter of the hate economy, which I hope I can find the thing for. And it's very possible that I can't. Oh gosh, I can't find it. Oh dear.
Was this the meme you were working on earlier?
It was the meme. I don't know where I put that. Tell you what, I'm going to try and tell you what, I have an alternate image that we can get up that will do the job.
Ominous.
And it's that one. That'll do us absolutely fine. While I desperately try and find the meme I very quickly produced. Oh gosh. There we go. Such
I prove that they're
professionalism.
watching Bogart and something with Bogart and Bacallin.
Absolutely. Can you? It's I think it was The Big Sleep I went for, because we saw that and we're a bit obsessed with it. Okay, what I want to talk about is the hate economy, and I'm stealing that phrase entirely from AA. I was calling it something else, but what I'm trying to talk about here is the phenomenon of hate following, hate watching something that is a disaster, and a disaster is going to be disastrous. That's sort of particularly relevant with regards to it's the Rings of Power kicked this off for me. Okay. I watch a lot of channels that review film content, and I've just found I kind of noticed in recent months they're getting ground down. They're having a bad time. I can hear the stress in their voice as they cover endless cack. That they're watching She-Hulk, they're watching Ms. Marvel, they're getting all hyped up to hate the Rings of Power, and you can hear them sort of feeling worn down by it. Literally, they're on there are so many streams that they share, and they were saying, "Oh, are you going to do Obi-Wan?" And one of them said, "Oh no, I can't. I've just done Miss Marvel. I can't face it. I can't face another one." And it got me thinking, like, we need to step away, because one, it's not doing us a lot of good hate watching all this stuff. These guys, bless them, I like so many of them. I do. I like so many of these channels. But they're going to be doing live coverage of all these series, which they're not going to run out. And they are absolutely hating them, having a terrible time. And I just think, if you know it's going to be terrible, guys, step away. Are you with me so far, folks? I've talked for a while.
You need to be the OG Roland Rat, ascending above the pile of keck, as you have called it, or keck, ascending above the pile of steaming excrement, like Jesus rising from the tomb.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Lots
be
of
above
Lotus
it.
There.
A heck of a lot of Lotus Eaters.
Bless them.
I know you can't help it. That the algo wants it, but that's the thing. The algo genuinely wants it. Now, I commented on this ages ago. Do you remember when the first posters for Rings of Power came out?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll get them back up, because I did have the meme, just so we know what we're talking about. These came out, and they were obviously, we knew that they said they were going to sort of be making it a diverse casting, and they made this the focal point of the posters. And the thing is, it's probably not going to be a major factor in the story, to be honest, but it is a major factor in the marketing. And my understanding of this, my theory, is there is so much content out there that we very much have an attention economy. It is really darn hard to get someone's attention when they have so many other things they could be doing. So you need anything that gets people interested and hooked. And one way you can do it is getting a storyline going, getting the rage train going. And so I think there is genuinely a part of the marketing process where they have planned in a hate reaction. They have planned in controversies. And I think the Rings of Power demonstrated this early on with the poster. They ran these posters, which, re-emphasized that they were going to do diverse casting, very unusual Not what Tolkien envisaged. Okay. Wheezy, you're already ahead of me. You are ahead of me. That is exactly it. They're not only going to do that and claim bigotry down the line when it tanks. I think a lot of it is so that there is a storyline after the posters come out to say, oh my gosh, can you believe all these horrible bigoted fans? Can you believe how much, like, how many racist memes were on Twitter?
It's essentially a sort of a crowdsourced advertisement campaign. They don't need to do it because they know that the outrage will do it for them.
That is exactly what I'm thinking. And, you know, who doesn't love a spicy meme? But I don't think it's the best image for ourselves when we make those memes. They're waiting on you to make that, despite being 13% of hobbits, etc., etc. Brandy bucks are responsible for 52% of scrumpings, etc.
Those brandy bucks.
Yeah, they want those memes because that is the storyline. And when they push that storyline, as we saw them do, they had that, and then there was a response storyline to the toxic fan backlash. This is all part of a role that they're expecting you to play. Which is why I think don't feed it. Like, they are always going to find silly comments on the internet. And some of the memes were quite funny, let's be honest. But basically, when we do that, we are slotting into a role that they want us to play. And I kind of think after we see that trailer or we see that poster and we know what it is that they're going to do, I kind of think, just like you said, Amy, we got to ascend. We got to be like this interesting character, OG Roland Rat here, and just sort of step off, watch something else. If you're going to watch it,
Apostolic Majesty's channel and Nathan Hood's channel have done a lot of work, a lot of content on Tolkien and his universe and his life and what he was attempting to do. Watch that instead.
For sure. There's a Discard I'm in where, as well as that, they're also doing they've got a weekly film club, and the focus for this month is the original trilogy from the early 2000s. Just because why watch anything new when the originals are just so rewarding and full of memes? So full of memes. But yeah, I think you're right. Just find stuff that's more interesting, that engages with it honestly and authentically, and isn't this kind of pandering. And what you were saying, Horrorshow, about the kind of attention economy and the attention grabbing, as someone who works in kind of marketing related fields, that's absolutely true. It's impossible to get people's attention. It is, it's a huge challenge, and therefore in many ways the kind of creating the kind of spiral of hate and anger and sort of visceral gut reactions is probably the most surefire way to win at the marketing campaign, and therefore the best way to beat them is to starve them of attention. Because if you look elsewhere, if you find stuff elsewhere that is more interesting and more engaging and more honest, then their marketing budgets fail and their advertising eventually fails if enough people stop paying attention, because that's what they need from us, is our eyeballs. Don't give them your eyeballs.
Fantastic. Very, very well said. So that's a good recommendation, Amy. So it was Apostolic Majesty and was it Nathan Hood?
Apostolic Majesty and Nathan Hood. And if you want something that is like along the lines of Tolkien and is relatively new, new releases, I would suggest the work of the author Susanna Clarke. She's published 2 novels, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and Piranesi, and also a short story collection called The Ladies of Grey Sedu. And these are published in the 90s and in 2020. And they're very much like within the sort of literary legacy that Tolkien and his friends at Oxford were building on. And she's doing that completely earnestly. right now, and these books are completely absent of anything cynical or woke or destructive that we get in a lot of like modern media, a lot in the modern publishing industry, and hers are completely absent of that. They're extremely white pilling, especially Piranesi, her most recent one. I would really recommend them.
Oh, nice.
Oh, good. I'd heard mixed reviews of Piranesi, but I think I'll check it out because I loved. I keep getting Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I keep mixing them the wrong way around. But yeah,
wonderful
author.
Good recommendation. Before we move on, out of interest, did you read? I want to say it's Sarah Morgenstern's Night Circus.
I haven't read it. No. Is it any good?
I gather she really struggled with the follow-up, but Night Circus I found very original, really interesting. I absolutely loved it. A very unique book. So
I was about to recommend it as well. Not that we have the same brain or anything.
I'll have to give that a go. That's always popping up places, isn't it?
Yeah. Amy, do you want to just put those books in the chat quickly, just so people have it on reference, and it's also to jog my memory as well. And I'll move us on. While you're doing that, I'd say it has been an interesting week for Horrorshow. If you've seen on Twitter, I have completed the Invasion of the Body Snatchers video. It's massive. Well, for me, you know. When Mauler puts out 5 hours 50 on Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, my 71-minute analysis of Invasion of the Body Snatchers looks positively concise and coke-fueled. But for me, it's a long video. However, it is in copyright hell. I am on my 5th or 6th revision at this point. I think realistically, I'm going to get it to you next week. And if it fails 2 more uploads, I will probably just start a Odyssey account, which will be kind of ironic, but that'll make sense when you watch the video. I'm going to try and get it out next week, okay? But I will let you guys know. By the way, out of interest, chat, I would usually upload it on a Tuesday, but do you prefer a Friday upload? I might get a poll going and vote, but just out of interest, chat, do you prefer, for the non-streams, do you prefer a Friday upload or a Tuesday upload? Just let me know.
But yes, she prides herself on a family-friendly stream, but the language around the 5th or 6th copyright claim was distinctly family unfriendly, family hostile.
Very much so. Very, very much so. Yeah. So you get broken down after a certain stage when something has passed copyright review already, and then they flag it up again. They flag up one bit at a time. Oof. Oh, heartbreaking. And anyway, I won't go into it because it will elevate the stress. And instead, we don't want to elevate the stress. We want to elevate the appreciation of an absolutely fantastic horror movie. So before we, mixed responses there. Okay. On when you want it out. Okay. And let's elevate our viewing habits. We're going to talk about The Haunting. I was going to tell you about a very confused but talented Ghanaian who is probably wishing she'd never responded to my message. But that's maybe a tale for another time. I think we should get into the topic. I'll tell you about that next week, chat. Because we want to talk about The Haunting, based on Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. And my mind is still completely blown by the fact that the director of this is also the director of West Side Story. How has that happened?
And The Sound of Music.
What?
Oh my gosh, he's done that as well.
Yeah, he did it afterwards in 65. Slightly afterwards, a few years afterwards.
Yeah. I was going to drop what else? Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Robert Wise, absolute legend.
I'm not okay with it.
I'm not prepared for this at all. This is a very special film with a massive influence. Stephen King, hugely influenced by the author of the novel this is based on, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Oh my gosh, watch The Haunting and follow it up with The Shining. You are going to see Kubrick using the same shots, the same motion. There is no way he wasn't directly inspired by The Haunting when he was making The Shining. Massively. These are things we're getting into. What I'm trying to convey here is this film is so unbelievably influential, but also pretty darn atypical for what it's covering. Before we get too far into it, and by the way, I should warn, we are going to go full spoilers, as you should know at this point. Full spoilers when we talk about The Haunting. I just wondered, Amy, would you like to talk a little bit about Shirley Jackson and this novel, if you just casually clue people in?
Of course, yeah. Well, I prepared some stuff, so if I go over time or overboard, just let me know. But Shirley Jackson was born in San Francisco in 1916 to Geraldine and Leslie Jackson. Geraldine was a society girl. She essentially had like Jackson, which is this is relevant to the film. She essentially had Jackson by accident, and Jackson was quite a disappointing child, and her younger son Barry was born a few years earlier. But I do think that the disharmony between them has been exaggerated. They were in contact and visiting each other throughout there until Shirley's death in 1965. And Shirley's parents always provided financial aid to Shirley and her husband while they were both struggling writers, right up until they'd had their fourth kid. Her maternal great-great-grandfather was an architect who moved from New England to San Francisco in the 1860s during the gold rush, where he essentially built San Francisco. He built houses for those that made their fortunes during the gold rush, and his firm, Samuel C. Bugby and Sons, designed the California Theater, Wade Opera House, and the Golden Gate Park Conservatory. And some of the houses have their own extremely morbid histories, if you would like to look into that, including one of them that was next to a millionaire's house who was next to this poor local guy who made gravestones, and he just put a gravestone of this millionaire who he hated in full view of his house, of his name on it. And so there was some extremely cursed houses. She grew up in Burlingame outside of San Francisco, and they relocated to Rochester, New York when she was around 17, and she stayed in the East Coast for the rest of her life. And her writing career is split in two right from the beginning. So there's the horror, thriller, psychological writing, and mainly published as the novels that she wrote throughout her life, as well as and a bunch of short stories as well. And then there's the sort of lighter domestic comedies and writing about her family, which were usually published in women's magazines like Good Housekeeping, Women's Home Companion, Mademoiselle, Charm, Ladies' Home Journal, those kind of things. And then they were collated and published as two autobiographies called Raising Demons and Life Among the Savages. And this
from what I read of her, it seemed like there was that real hunger for material from her. And so you got all these volumes of those short stories and drafts of short stories. Even after she passed, I believe they published a fair few posthumous collections.
Yeah, there was some published just the other year too that were published in a magazine just the other year, and they're still, her oldest son, Lawrence, is still working extremely hard to maintain her legacy, and he's the one that's essentially making all of these uncollected family comedy writings available to us now. You can buy them in books now. Let Me Tell You and Come Along With Me. Let Me Tell You, and there's another short story collection that includes these. And then they're not people are often quite confused by the fact that she wrote these two extremely different genres, but I don't see them as particularly different. I mean, they're writing about houses and families and societies in the 1950s in all its aspects. Like, he's essentially writing about women for women, and I don't see them as. I think The Haunting of Hill House is in its the logic behind it and its themes and what it's exploring is extremely similar to a lot of what is going on in her sort of semi-autobiographical comedic writings.
And there's also, that makes a heck of a lot of sense of a lot of the style of The Haunting of Hill House. So for folks who haven't read the novel, when the group of characters all get together initially, there's a lot of, I would say, that light-hearted, playful comedic dialogue where they all basically make up obviously fake histories for each other.
Right up until after the first hauntings, they're still behaving like that.
It's lovely, light dialogue. It's very funny. It's very fast-paced and witty. And it's not quite what you expect. That really makes sense if she's writing a lot of this stuff on the side.
It was essentially what paid her bills until the Haunting of Hill House was the major success. Like, so she published The Lottery in the New Yorker on the 26th of June in 1948, which is about the ritual stoning in a village, presumably in the Northeast in New England area. And she talked about it to some extent, but she never really explained what it's about. And at the time, the New Yorker wasn't distinguishing between like nonfiction and fiction, and it was making out that all of its nonfiction was set around the date of the publication. So loads of people thought it was real, and she commented that it made like her extremely unpopular with her mailman. She got letters for the rest of her life, like asking like what on earth was going on with that. And then with The Haunting of Hill House, that was like the financial breakthrough. She could pay off her mortgage. She never needed to borrow money again. Her debts to her parents were in the range of $1,800 at this point, which in the 1959, that's a lot of money. And so it led to like extreme financial security for them. So she spent the majority of her adult life in North Bennington, Vermont, with her husband, Stanley Edgar Hyman, who was a professor of English at the Bennington College, which was like a small, elite, extremely expensive, ultra-liberal, all-girls college on the outskirts of the town. And they'd met as students at Syracuse University, where he read one of her stories in the college newspaper and declared he wanted to find out who this woman was and marry her on the spot. Like, they were both extremely interested in anthropology, which is quite evident in The Haunting of Hill House. And he was really heavily influenced by the Cambridge Ritualists and the Golden Bough. And their joint interest in this area started while at Syracuse, with a lecture series by Leonard Brown, who The Haunting of Hill House is dedicated to. He taught literature from a Marxist materialist perspective, and he was influenced by sociology and anthropology, and those themes are relevant throughout all of like Jackson's work. Even her, she even looks at her children with a sort of anthropological eye. But even though The Haunting of Hill House is like very obviously supernatural, those undertones, like, I think remain. I don't know if you noticed that.
No, I didn't.
Mark Way is an anthropologist.
I was going to say that was bringing that up, that kind of analytical. I haven't read the novel; it's on my list. But the start of the film, he goes into so much kind of background about the history of the house and the history of the family, and talks about, there are a couple of moments where he's sort of saying, the importance of kind of preserving the experimental environment to make sure that the results they get are accurate. So it's interesting that that's kind of a theme that sort of continues throughout the rest of her writing, that sort of anthropological eye.
Yeah, and even though she was never in the same way as her husband was a Marxist or a materialist, who was into the sort of the trends for like Freudianism at the time, she remained definitely on the side of a belief in the supernatural.
Yeah, and something I found her doing in this, which you don't pick up from the film as much as you get from the novel, is that I felt she was taking the supernatural seriously. So we'll talk about it some. Maybe now's a good point to talk about it. Well, maybe let's set the scene. So actually, no, we'll get through, all the way through the notes first. But I did feel like Dr. Marquet's wife is basically, she's put in as like a joke believer, a figure of someone who is your stereotypical cliche person into haunting, who's a ridiculous character, to be contrasted with everyone else who has a much more mature, I guess, a mature fear and appreciation of the supernatural. Does that sound fair? I think I rambled a bit there. Sorry.
No, I think that makes that makes sense. They seem to like go between. Marquet is always going on about the importance of a belief in the supernatural, and he's slightly more sympathetic towards her, I think, than the other characters. But they do kind of sway between back and forth, all of the characters, between being nice to each other and being extremely vicious towards each other. And he does say like that the modern mind has no longer has a way of dealing with the supernatural and the unexplainable, and that leaves us extremely vulnerable to the chaos that surrounds us.
That's true. He does talk about it. I'm so sure, I can't remember the quote, but he talks about it in terms of just, it's an area we don't understand yet, and he thinks he can bring it into the realm of understanding. And I suppose you could then maybe say the material realm.
Yeah, he mentioned, I can't remember the word he used, but he said that there was like, was it the preternatural, where there's some stuff that is,
yes,
we know that we will understand this at some point, which he distinguishes from the paranormal, which I couldn't really tell. He seems to believe that there will always be a paranormal, and he distinguishes that from the preternatural.
I think so. Yes, he's an earnest seeker, I suppose, who's trying to use the tools at his disposal. Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off in the middle of your notes there, but they're interesting, darn it.
Well, I didn't really. That was basically it. I was going to leave. I thought if you wanted to bring up The Haunting of Hill House, the book, I thought you might want to do that throughout the discussion of the film. So I kind of left it at that. But
no, that's absolutely grand.
She died of a heart attack 5 years later. She did manage to get to the New York premiere of this film, and she was only 48.
Quite tragic, really. Quite tragic.
Yeah.
I'm going to be very tempted to sort of read her personal life into this a bit.
She was extremely against any attempts to do that, to the extent that when the people that, I can't remember the name of the book, but when they create the anthologies or like dictionaries of contemporary American writers, when they came to her about that, she told them to get lost, and she just gave them an extremely terse sentence. So all of these other authors have their paragraphs about their life and their work written by the author. She was like, no.
All right, I will restrict my inquisitive. All right, I won't speculate. I did just I found the characterization of Luke interesting, given her husband, but I will step away. I will not project.
I guess that you can never actually separate an author from her work, and most of her ideas did come from things she experienced in real life, but she said that an accurate recounting of events does not a story make, and so things were, even her autobiographical work was heavily fictionalized.
Oh, interesting. Well, she's in good company. Tolkien and Nabokov would join her in telling people to sod off with their accusations of projecting.
As psychoanalysis attempts. Yeah.
Yes.
Indeed.
I'm a bit more sympathetic to psychoanalyzing authors, but that's only because I'm doing it in the next video. So.
Well, there's a lot of mummy issues in her books. There's a lot of matricide.
Well, that is interesting.
Including a haunting.
Well, let's maybe just get straight into it then, and we can highlight where there's a difference from the book. And there are quite a few interesting areas that had me just sort of scratching my head. I was just trying to work out why a change was made. But let's tell you what, wifey, this can be a challenge for you. In what I'm still calling the Guinness test. Imagine in the time it takes a barmaid to pour you a pint of Guinness, how would you describe The Haunting to someone? The rough plot, what's it concern?
Okay. I probably always pour Guinness too fast, so you'll see my disgusting approach to beer in a second. But I would say it starts with a kind of lavish opening where an academic, a sort of cultured English gentleman's voice, is describing the history of a house called Hill House and his intention to carry out some experiments there, and kind of talking about the sort of who built the house and its kind of tragic history and the various people who've died in it, and kind of the sort of ongoing impact. And you can hear Gatsby. And so he's kind of setting the scene and creating this very sort of spooky, unnerving atmosphere. And then it cuts to a discussion of, this is really hard to do them briefly. I can see why people struggle. So basically, you then sort of realize he's got permission to use the house, and he's invited various people who have potentially kind of psychic or supernatural abilities to come and spend some time in the house. And he's getting very firmly warned off this because it's a very bad idea. The film then cuts to focus on the woman who I would say becomes kind of its protagonist, a woman called Nell, who lives in a very difficult situation, clearly a very fraught family background. And she's adamant that she is going to join this experiment. She's going to go to Hill House, come what may. So we follow her. We hear the cat screaming in the background. And she makes it to the house. She's the first to arrive. And you sort of realise that she's a very kind of tense, nervous, kind of wound up woman. And the rest of the film kind of follows everyone else as they arrive and sort of spend a couple of nights in the house, and how it kind of gets more and more sort of, they are haunted, the house is haunted, and it's almost like the house becomes a character in itself in the film. It has a kind of agency and a kind of creepy, dark power that frightens them all, even though you never see kind of anything, any ghosts or anything in particular. It's just things like doors moving or loud noises. Just the atmosphere gets more and more tense, more and more sinister, until eventually kind of things come to a head. I feel like I've gone off piste, but basically it just sort of gets tenser and tenser. So she screws up the tension, or the film screws up the tension more and more, with kind of the interplay between sort of various characters. So Theo, who's this very, as someone said, kind of a bit of a sort of sex kitten, a bit kind of provocative and canonically a lesbian, versus this kind of very uptight, very anxious woman, Nell. And lots of kind of feelings come to the surface, and things are said and not said, until eventually Nell decides she wants to stay in the house. She feels the house wants her to stay. Basically this Guinness is overflowing.
What are you doing,
yeah,
Claire?
I don't know. I've got lost. It's a very complicated film to summarize, but basically, she falls in love with the guy running the experiment, but then his wife turns up, and then the house kind of turns them all a bit mental, and she ends up driving her car into a tree so that she can stay in the house forever. Except she may or may not have deliberately meant to do that. But then at the end of the film, you realise that she is there, another presence haunting the house. That really lost coherence halfway through.
It's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah,
It is
I
a
take it back, because I
challenge.
was always like, why can't Harrian summarize a film in 3 minutes? Harrian, I'm sorry, come back from the maid cafe. All is forgiven.
Yeah. Come on, Harrian. いい大丈夫ですよ. I think he responds to that now. Anyway, yeah, it is a challenge, although in fairness, Harrian's record for the 3-minute summary is 2 hours and 16 minutes. So
I feel like I was briefer.
you were. It's you may have got a sense of it, folks. It's not, I would say it's not a typical ghost story. It is not a typical haunted house story. It is, I'm going to go out on a limb. I'd say it's a reaction to those. It's a desire to do them with more dignity and more depth, with a lot more going on. I'm thinking particularly of the very similarly named House on Haunted Hill, and I'm so glad I didn't mess that up.
It's really interesting because both the producer and writer of the film and Shirley Jackson called it a good old-fashioned ghost story.
I think that's fair, if depending on where you set old-fashioned. Like I'm thinking back to, well, maybe that's.
I'm thinking M.R. James.
Yeah, I was going to say M.R. James. I was about to say Poe, but I think Poe gives you the more blatant, gruesome payoffs. Whereas this is, I think M.R. James is probably the better comparison, but even M.R. James will, how can I say, spell it out a bit more, not have as much ambiguity. Do you think that's fair?
I would say that the thing that like made the largest impression on me when reading the novel and then when watching the film is the sense of it's the horror element of it, the truly like scary element of it came from the discord between Nell and the rest of the group, in the way that she was like very obviously going insane and nobody else, and she didn't realize it, but everyone around her realized it, and it kind of made the level of dysfunction within Nell that she had no awareness of, the way she was like almost a childishly emotional, and whenever someone said, or whenever she had a perceived slight, it was almost made me feel like, it almost made me cringe.
Yeah, she flies off the handle frequently. She says awful things to Theo. I think almost childish is quite fair.
It's like stunted development.
And a feature of both the film and the book is a genuine uncertainty over her account of things. The unreliable narration is very strong in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the build up to her, after she takes the car and she's driving to Hill House, she's encountering these other houses that she passes by on the road, and she's taking she's envisioning her life within those different houses and incorporating them into this new person who she is, who she then goes on to describe herself as to the other guests. It's like a complete fantasy.
The stone lions.
Watch her invent. The stone lions, yeah. The house with the rose bushes, the oleander garden, the house, the cup full of stars that she sees a small child wanting in a roadside cafe, and she creates a whole new persona.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, and I thought the reference to her having a cup full of stars, it's a cup that's got stars painted in the bottom of it. It's such a beautiful phrase. It I just saw so many future authors taking from that, making notes, and being like, yeah, I'm going to have that.
It's
Stephen
something
King
only a
especially.
child could say.
Yeah. It's this idea of impossibilities that she really believes in and talks about so earnestly that really maps onto what we later find quite disturbing, her detachment from reality. The actual elements of haunting that we see here are also, they deny us that certainty because we, for a start, we're firmly embedded in Nell's POV, which already adds a layer of uncertainty. But then we get the fact that there aren't real solid indicators. Now, it's almost certain that the supernatural is going on, but it's so shaded in deniability. We don't really get the visible ghosts. The closest we get is a sort of pounding on the walls that Theo hears as well.
The bulging of the door when they're all in the parlor.
And
and the squeaky noise as that was happening. I was like, how did they do that in the 60s? It looked so real.
Brilliant stuff. Very softened light wood, and crew then pushing on it with a special pole that could force it to bend outwards. But it's wonderful for looking so surreal. Yeah.
Yeah, that was incredible.
So we hear, speaking of like we seeing things from Nell's perspective, it's like we hear her thoughts, we hear her speaking to herself in her head throughout the whole film.
And there's bits where you don't necessarily know whether it's sort of like, we were talking about this all the way back from the allotment earlier, about this idea of like how much of it's in her head, full stop, like how much of any of the supernatural things. I guess of course Theo kind of hears the banging too, but it's things like, you know, Theo's supposed sort of psychic abilities. You know, she's presented as this kind of mind reader, but how much of that could just be Nell being deeply oversensitive? Stuff like, you know, the sort of things about, you know, well, I didn't say you killed your mother. Theo says something like, well, I didn't say you killed your mother, or I don't think you killed your mother. But it's like, if given, yes, okay, we're watching a film, but it sort of feels like we're almost watching a film of Nell's perception of events. And so how much of that is actually more she's worrying about it and thinking about it and overthinking it, and therefore kind of creating this idea that like, that Theo is deeply hypersensitive and can pick up on what she's thinking, and that what she's thinking is this fear that people think she killed her mother. It's this sort of, you can get so many layers deep into this sort of deeply neurotic, troubled, sort of difficult woman. And I was thinking as you were talking, like, at first, my interpretation of the film was kind of, you know, they're all mostly okay, but they come to the house and the house distorts their characters while they're there. But actually, no, Nell, even from the start, when you first see her, she's essentially having a kind of, a bit of a tantrum. It sounds fairly justified, but still a tantrum about whether or not she gets to take the car. And she does act like a kind of stroppy child about it. And at the same time, you can kind of think, yes, it's quite justified given how sort of unpleasant her family are. But it's just this kind of childish, over-the-top, difficult nature. You can't help wondering, you know, are they difficult because she's actually quite vulnerable and also just a pain and they're fed up?
Yeah, she like stole the car. She, you know, I mean to take the car, and then she stole it anyway. And when the man at the garage asked her, like, are you sure this is your car? She said she gets really defensive. She's like, I paid for half of it.
Yeah.
And then when Theo says about the killing the mother, you know, it's like, that's like you know, at one point with the garage warden, it kind of seemed like a sort of an interaction you could imagine happening. And then with the Theo saying, discussing the mother and Nell reacting so strongly, is it reaches a point where if we're seeing it from her perspective, people are liable to, when someone says something, to completely distort what they've said into something completely different. And it's like, if we're seeing it from her perspective, maybe Nell never even, maybe Theo never even said that to her.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. I started to wonder, after a few sort of fairly easy things about you're thinking about changing your hair, etc., you brought new clothes, etc., observations that Theo makes early on, you do wonder how much then Nell starts just making it up. There's stuff.
Theo is so intuitive, even if she doesn't have psychic abilities. She's there because she guessed 19 out of 20 cards that she wasn't able to see that someone else was holding up. That's her psychic experience, which led to her supernatural experience, which led to her being invited into this experiment. And I think the film does make it seem as though she does have the ability to mind read, but then at the same time, how do we know that she's not just a bit intuitive?
I do end up leaning on the side that the haunting here denies us the really obvious payoffs, but at the same time, I think it is very much supernatural, basically because Theo is quite a strong indicator for me, but also how quickly, everything that goes on with Dr. Marquet's wife, where she is taken, she is driven mad, possessed even, however you might describe it. That's the sort of strongest bit of evidence for me that there is genuine supernatural stuff going on. But it's just such it's such a richer, more challenging, more psychologically developed and deep bit of horror than I suppose what we're presented with at the start. It's an odd thing that the movie starts off front loading the history of the house that the book makes you wait a while for. There's a cute bit where everyone's gathered, they've been a bit silly, and they sort of expect Dr. Marquet to play the role of the professor, and Jackson describes how he adopts poses and makes sort of unconsciously just sort of gestures to a blackboard that isn't there, as he's sort of gone into the role of being a professor, being a lecturer. And he delivers the history of the house in a sort of standard way that the film just sort of front loads, which is sort of like an odd structural decision to make. But
it's even more pronounced in the book, in the film. Sorry, that's how the film opens, with the history of the house.
Yeah, no, I didn't actually mind it because I found it incredibly powerful. It's a wonderful change. This is the other thing, that one of the most powerful sources of horror is this clear connection that Nell has to the house and the fates being basically intertwined. And they do just, they make it very clear to you, but you can only get it at the end, that she's basically received the same fate as some of the people in the house. So Nell is, and we did say spoilers, folks. I hope I'm not, you know what, even if you didn't do the horror homework, I hope you're enjoying this and you don't mind us spoiling it.
I would just say
both
that
the film and the book are so good that they can't be spoiled.
Yeah, I was just going to say that although I've seen it before, and we've watched a fair few films multiple times, horror films that is, but I would, and a lot of them you watch them the sort of second or third time and they're not really that scary. Like I remember being absolutely terrified by It Follows the first time we saw it. Second and third time I saw it, I was like, it's good. I can see how that scared me that time, but I'm not scared. I'm just kind of enjoying the ride. This one, I've seen it before. Arguably, it's a lot quote unquote tamer than many other modern horror films. But I had to get up to go and get. Well, I had to go and get a whiskey halfway through. I sound like such a lush, and put the chickens away. And I was sort of going downstairs, like turning the lights on, looking around corners, kind of. It really got to me. It's incredibly compelling still. Even if you know the plot, the atmosphere is not something that we can give away on stream. And I'm really looking forward to reading the novel.
I watched a review of Wolf Hall, and someone commented on it. I can't believe you told us Thomas Cromwell died. But it's like, what? Stop it! Like, I know I'm spoilers are just. If you're worried about spoilers, go to Reddit.
Okay,
good. I think Thomas Cromwell would be as surprised as any of us to find out that he hadn't died.
Yeah. So in that case, we'll just go into it because we want to point out the craft here. This is less. I would say that the movie is a lot less subtle, but it's that kind of happens. We have this wonderful foreshadowing of the fate of the first wife of Hugh Crane, the architect behind the house, crashing into a tree as something beyond her control causes her horse to be spooked. And obviously, Nell also loses control of her transport at the end in this sort of very awful bit of terror. She's compelled almost by this mania to drive off and to decide that she doesn't want to leave the house. But she's also lost control of the vehicle at some point, and you realize I felt it was like the house loosens its control on her just enough so that at the last moment she could be terrified and wonder what she was doing.
Mm-hmm. There's a note that Shirley Jackson wrote on the original manuscript was that Eleanor is the house. And I think if you see it from the perspective of what we're watching is the creation of a haunting. The house was always haunted by Eleanor. The house is Eleanor. And in a way, the house is a more real manifestation of Eleanor than the Eleanor that seems to be a living, walking, like flesh and blood woman. And that potentially Eleanor, it never really existed as a person in the real world. She's like sort of her manifestation in the world is in this house, which I think seems like quite a weird concept to get your head around at first. But I think when you see this within the context of Shirley Jackson's writing, she's really dealing with the parameters of the human imagination across all of her writing. She said she was dealing with the almost supernatural, and the imagination and supernatural seem to be one and the same, like exist on like a continuum within her work. I think that she was extremely critical of the limited nature of the imagination, of the state of human imagination in general in the society she lived at in the 1950s. And in a way, her novels are not like psychological novels or they're supernatural novels. They kind of are the same, one and the same. She doesn't see them as any different. And you see this throughout the entirety of her writing, from her earliest letters that we have that she's written. She wrote to her boyfriend, Stanley Edgar Hyman, when they were first dating in 1938, that they got a new toaster which leaps at one, and Barry and I spent hours baiting it from behind the kitchen door. And it just seems to be like the way she sees the world. Does that make sense?
Well, the idea of Eleanor being the house is massively supported in the movie.
Someone in the chat mentioned Rebecca.
Yes. We can touch on Rebecca in a bit, but I just want to, again, make it clear to people. Folks, if you love The Shining, you should love The Haunting. This idea of Eleanor basically getting the old "you've always been here" treatment, it is The Shining is feeding off this energy, this idea that someone was bound to the building, and a much more complex form of haunting, as well as I mentioned, some shots. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I was going to say that there could be no other ghosts. The house was just always Eleanor. I think that there's another short story she wrote at the same time called The Bus, which deals with the same structure of the manifestation of a haunting in real time, the creation of a haunted house in real time, and also a short story called Louisa, Please Come Home, in which a girl runs away from home and then comes back to find out that she's not actually the girl that ran away from home. Which is like, does she actually exist as that person? How did she come into existence then? And I think that if you were to take those two stories, which were written at the same time as The Haunting of Hill House, along with The Good Old House, which is a story about her moving into a new house, and how that house has a personality, has a woman watching over it, and the furnitures all have their own are all separate entities, and The Ghost of Laurette, which was these are both in Let Me Tell You, and then Louisa and The Bus are in Come Along With Me. The Ghost of Laurette, which was about her finding images of houses from around the world that she wanted to use as inspiration for the actual house, about how it was like it's sort of like a comedic piece where she's sort of joking about the people living within the pictures of the photographs that she's looking at. I think if you see it within that perspective, it makes sense that in a way she is the house. If you see what I mean.
It sounds almost like Shirley Jackson was sort of finding her way to the idea, trying bits of it in one story and bits of it in another, and then it's kind of coalescing and becoming this much more complete vision in The Haunting of Hill House. For some manifestations of Eleanor being the house, I thought the strongest example is something that pays off. I think they make it too obvious in the film. In the book, it knocked me, as in just a massive, oh my gosh, connecting the idea was a big revelation. That the aspect of haunting that this film is probably most known for is the big banging on the walls, banging on the doors, that's sort of hunting Eleanor down. Now we have a little bit of biography at the start, recounting the daughter of Hugh Crane, who reaches old age in the house and dies of her infirmity, banging on the walls with a cane ignored. And then Eleanor is talking later about her mother, her sick mother, who she's been caring for the whole time. And the night she dies, Eleanor ignores her banging on the walls. And you connect those ideas and realizing, you're wondering, this banging, is this just only speaking to Eleanor because of her sick mother? Or is it the other way round? She's basically a manifestation of these very different eras of, I'm mangling this massively, folks, but she's almost like a portmanteau of traumas in the house.
I did find myself wondering, and I couldn't find a way to articulate it, so this will probably be even more coherent than what you just said.
I was trying, I mangled it utterly. Go ahead, wife.
But they come across the statue in the kind of orangery. And
yes.
Everyone kind of makes the comment that, you know, the companion in the background looks a little bit like Nell. And it's the companion who didn't listen when her patient Abigail was banging on the wall. And you know, and that's when Abigail died. And then you've got the kind of parallel situation in which Nell is still feeling that guilt for not going to her mother when her mother was banging on the wall with her cane. I did find myself wondering, like, the stories are so similar. Again, it's that disconcerting, unreliable narrator thing. I found myself wondering, is the story of the companion and Abigail actually true? Did that actually happen? Or is that actually her if she is the house, she kind of is, almost predestined to haunt it and to be part of it. Is that story actually a kind of amalgamation of two different things that happened? Did the companion ignore her patient, or did that even happen at all, or is it just her own kind of guilt about her mother? I don't know. It just felt quite sort of a nice unsettling uncertainty there to me, and I don't know whether I was just conjuring that up out of nowhere or not. But the other thing I was just thinking is there's so much kind of, like, my favourite paper at university was kind of psychoanalytic readings of texts, and we did a really interesting sort of stuff looking at the writing of Edgar Allan Poe, which feels kind of like it's linked sort of almost to this kind of through literature, that sort of the history of horror stories and ghost stories. Just the kind of the sort of psychoanalytic readings at play here in terms of what's going on, who's seeing what, what's actually happening in terms of that kind of fragmentation of Eleanor's own selfhood. Sorry, I'm getting really excited and I'm losing my ability to speak English.
Well, that's a good way of saying it. Like, one way of describing it and I'm trying to make sense of it myself and sort of explore the idea of Eleanor is the house, is effectively she's such a blank slate, but at the same time, the elements of her life match the house so much that basically it's like the house has to have her. She fits it too perfectly.
She's like coming home is how it's described. She's like, I'm home, I belong here.
Please help Eleanor come home is the graffiti on the wall. There's also,
speaking of the companion, sorry, just really quick. Speaking of the companion, a lot of that does seem to be based on the extremely, that could just be local legend, right? As well. So that might like Claire said, that might not actually have ever happened. That could just be local legend.
But
then the fact that Nell kind of almost inserts herself into the story and kind of almost ties herself into it so that she is now part of that history because of the parallel events in her own life.
Well, we see her just sort of lose herself as she goes along. The driving along and seeing a house with stone lions, and then she starts telling the story in which she lives in a house with stone lions and she has them. It fits into the idea of her just losing this identity and being molded by the house. And as you say, this rumor is going around, so it gets incorporated into her own life. For everything that I've said about this movie being less subtle, I want to actually give it a bit of praise for one beautiful bit of imagery that really tells a story of Nell is the house. I will just have to get the image.
I would say that I would say that I disagree with the perspective that she loses herself as she comes to the house. I would say that maybe that nastiness is the core of who she is, and Theo says as much after they bring up after she brings up her crush on Markway, and Theo says, "Is this another of your crazy hallucinations?" And Nell says, "I'm not crazy." And Theo says, "Crazy as a loon. You really expect me to believe you're sane and the rest of the world is mad?" And then Nell says, "Well, why not? The world is full of inconsistencies, unnatural things, nature's mistakes, they're called. You, for instance." But, if we see it as Nell is coming home, maybe it's her who's nature's mistake, and it's not an unraveling of herself, but it's her coming into the sort of essence of her personality, which is this sort of hideous, childish fear that she has. And a lot of the time, the banging on the walls, it doesn't sound like someone banging for help. It sounds like kids tormenting you and causing a ruckus, and there's giggling.
For sure. There's an interesting thing that I'm I've just spotted Slim's joke. I'm dying. Anyway, leaving that aside, that they sort of meant, this is a massive tangent. Sorry, that it kind of, I think it kind of ties into that, like that she's always been this sort of like disordered, kind of crabbed person. In that they mentioned the reason she gets invited is because of the sort of poltergeist experience that we don't learn much more about from her childhood, of when she was sort of 11 and stones sort of flying at the family house. And it made me, that's quite a common depiction of poltergeist hauntings. They seem to start with particularly young women in early adolescence. There's a fascinating podcast from, unfortunately, the BBC called the Battersea Poltergeist, which is about a very well documented case of someone, of a young girl who, when she was about 11, there started being kind of massive banging in her house, to the point that like all the neighbours were kind of coming around at 3 a.m. being like, "Can you guys keep it down? We're being kept awake." And they were like, "Yeah, no, we don't know what this is." But it's just this, I don't know, it's sort of making me wonder whether there's an element that we're sort of there's a hint there of this started with her, something started with her and hasn't gone away, and that she is kind of causing this distortion around her, and that yes, maybe the house is the right place for her. I don't know where I'm going with that, but it just made me think sort of the film never really then it keeps dropping hints about the kind of poltergeist activity and then never really takes them forward. It just makes me wonder.
The film was made in consultation with the man of the ridiculous name of Nandor Fodor, who was a parapsychologist who wrote about poltergeists, and how he addressed this issue of why is so many poltergeist phenomena based around essentially like pubescent girls, and he did come to the conclusion that this was some sort of a manifestation of like hysteria.
Nandor Fodor.
Yes,
that's amazing.
Difficult.
We were really chuffed at Village of the Damned's screenwriter Sterling Siliphant. Nandor Fodor is up there, and some of the greatest names ever discovered.
Sterling Siliphant sounds grand, though. Nandor Fodor is just a mouthful.
Yeah, you can't. That's a tongue twister and a half.
I can see a sort of odd couple comedy of those two together.
I would watch it.
One of them Sterling's there trying to lay out all the best silver, and Nandor's like, which one do I use for the pot noodle? It writes itself, folks. It writes itself. I picked up this image here just because it struck me, and hey, Mr. Gently Benevolent, good to see you, man. When Nell kind of slips away from the group in an echo of my favorite bit from the novel, she's dancing through the house, and she passes a statue that we saw before, absolutely beautifully sculpted, of a veiled statue. She passes it, the camera lingers on it in close-up, like I've got here, making sure you can't miss it. Then Nell goes into the room, still dancing, and gets caught up in the curtain. It's not as clear in the bottom half of that screen cap, but it's a white curtain, so she gets veiled just like the statue. And it's this feeling of the barrier between her and the house is dissipating and reducing, and I just thought it was
beautiful.
Yeah, it was a lovely, clever bit of imagery that they did there.
There's some extremely like I think a lot of the film does seem kind of old-fashioned, and a lot of the characters are a bit ridiculous, but the some of the cinematography in it is beautiful, and it can be quite jarring when you compare it to the sort of ridiculousness of the characters and the sort of transatlantic accents. But some of the, like, at the beginning when they when the woman's pushed down the stairs and the way she lands it's like I love it. They're like works of art.
Wifey, you said that you found a lot of it was shot very. It looked modern to you. I recall.
Yeah, I was just struck watching it again how, and I suppose it's an interesting comparison because obviously over the last few weeks the horror homework's all been films from the 1960s, and some of them very definitely feel dated in terms of the cinematography. But this, I can't put my finger on it, but there were certainly elements where I think some of the delivery of the lines and some of the kind of blocking of the scenes felt very, certainly at the start, felt very stilted and very dated. But as the film went on, I think there was some, and I can't now think of any examples, which is really useful, but there were just sort of some beautiful moments where it just felt very, very modern. Some of the kind of, I think some of the close-ups on people's faces or the kind of angles it took or the way it was kind of showing some of the hauntings without really showing you anything. It's the kind of, it's all done through, well, A, the kind of sound design, but then B, the sort of the camera angles and the kind of way the camera moves. It just felt very modern. There were a couple of bits actually that almost looked like kind of modern found footage. One of the bits where Theo and Nell are kind of clutching each other in bed in sort of terror as the house is booming around them. And the camera then just kind of almost runs over to the door and runs along the bottom of the door to see if there's anyone's feet kind of moving along the bottom. That, you could tell that was being, or it certainly looked handheld. And it made me think of the kind of, modern found footage in that sort of very jerky, slightly disorienting camera style, which felt very, very modern for its era.
It would like shake, wouldn't it, as it zoomed in?
Yeah.
It would look all over the place and then focus in on this one striking image.
Well, that's the exact technique that Kubrick used in The Shining. The sort of focus and then sudden zoom, and it would have that sort of rattly music. Think of folks, if you remember your Shining, the ghost who says "great party, isn't it?" and the zoom in on the how can I say, gentlemen enjoying each other's company in an unconventional manner. It's that shot that he used repeatedly. You get the exact one in here.
If no one else can picture that exactly, you should bear in mind that Horrorshow used to watch The Shining as a way to help her fall asleep as a teenager. So what was it, night after night, pretty much?
Other way round, actually. I think I've mentioned this on stream before, but horrible trouble staying asleep. And I would frequently give up and get up at 4:30. And I had a limited number of VHSs. And The Shining was one of them. So I've watched The Shining at about 5 a.m. an ungodly number of times during my formative years. But I turned out fine, so I wouldn't worry about it. I just want to go back on something before I go and get waifu a whiskey. Because Amy, you talked about the characters being a bit hysterical, a bit over the top and ridiculous. And I did find that TCG can't be here tonight, but in his score, he had a big problem with this. He found it quite difficult to enjoy the film because of, I think, Nell's hysteria. That the film makes very obvious in a way that the novel can camouflage a bit more.
Yeah, and Luke's like a frat boy. Essentially, and even Theo's character is just, she just struts around the place in a extremely domineering way. I kind of think, other than, I think Markway is probably the most subtle of them.
Yeah,
I absolutely loved him. He was a delight. We need to clone him. Anyway, so you're saying the NREB, you're saying Spielberg was influenced. Yeah, so I think we got a Kubrick influence, a Spielberg influence. Martin Scorsese's admiration for The Haunting is well known. I believe he cites it as the scariest film, according to him. This has many an admirer. It did have some rather notable detractors. It had censorship problems, interestingly enough.
What for?
Was that? Yeah, what for?
The big dose of gay that was included in it. Unfortunately,
it's a very subtle dose of gay.
Well, Harrion isn't around to groan and say "shut up," so I won't spend as much time on it. But there was originally a bit more written in about Theo being gay, and they had a scene that made it a bit more explicit. Now you've got to remember this is only 2 years after Victim, so they had this stuff in, but not massively. The BBFC was still saying, don't include it, or the cinema is not the place for this discussion, which I thought was a nice way of phrasing it.
Yeah.
I'm not making it up, Cro-Minion. It's in deliberately. It is in deliberately, but it's quite. I've said it many. Sorry, Amy. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, in the original manuscript, for Shirley Jackson's manuscript, she was originally lesbian and she cut it out. It's not made up. She's very 60s. The way she dresses is extremely modern compared to all of the other characters. She's dressed by Mary Quant.
Waifu noticed that. I had no idea who Mary Quant was, but I thought that was a great touch.
She was a fashion designer in London in the 60s, and she was she popularized a lot of the extremely classic looks associated with the 60s and women in the 60s, and credited with popularizing the miniskirt or repopularizing the miniskirt as well. And she had some fantastic outfits, especially the one at the beginning.
She really does. Theo is an absolute joy to watch in this. But I will repeat my point. I like it a lot more when the stuff is kept subtle, kept secret, on the down low. I like it a lot more. I just thought we got better gay stories when they had to be clever about it. So I will always prefer Strangers on a Train to Moonlight. This just adds it's just so much more interesting this way. But if you're interested, the scene that they cut out was one which was going to take place in Theo's apartment. She was going to come back to the room in a terrible state of disarray and I hate you, I'm leaving you, or something to that effect, written in lipstick on the mirror, which was meant to be a more subtle, it's not straight up, it's not like I'm leaving you and I'm taking all the Tegan and Sarah albums. But it was strong enough, it was a strong enough hint for people to get.
I felt like it was
toned it down a bit, which is.
It was. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say I liked that it was in many ways toned down. It was quite nice, sort of yesterday after finishing watching it and then looking up kind of some of the history of how the film was made and going, oh, I did pick up on that. Oh, good. But it wasn't kind of in your face. It wasn't kind of Harry Shum Jr. being kind of broadcast everywhere. And it was just nicely kind of gently done. Sort of reminds me of how, and this is my own nerdery coming through, in sort of Agatha Christie and sort of golden age detective fiction, you'll come across, pairs of middle-aged women living together as friends because, it's housing costs. They just need to save money on housing. And of course, if one of them gets murdered, the other one will be completely devastated and fall apart as if it's her life partner who's died. But they're just friends living together. And I quite like that sort of subtlety in that it's a very gentle portrayal. It's sort of nicely done.
I like the thought of two companionable spinsters though, living with their cats and their
there's
and their darning.
There's definitely I could go off on a tangent, and I think I've heard Proper Horror Show go downstairs to get me some whiskey, so she can't stop me. It's a bugbear of mine in many sort of adaptations of stuff written in this kind of era or just before. Modern filmmakers will just kind of parachute in a pair of lesbians and go, these two women live together in the novel, they must be lesbians. And half the time, I don't think they are. Half the time, they probably are just a pair of old spinsters living together and being friends. And it kind of takes away from the poignance of the few instances where they kind of clearly are canonically lesbian. There's A Murder is Announced and Halloween Party. There's two very, very subtle moments where there's just these two, essentially two couples. And it is, if you're reading, you don't even need to read that much between the lines to see that they are, intended as a lesbian couple. But it's like when every Agatha Christie adaptation has like 3 spare lesbians and an extra gay man. And, it just kind of takes away from the fact that actually it is there and it is gentle. And as Horrorshow said, it's kind of nice when they're not necessarily saying let's all get back in the closet, but, if we could have some nice plush wallpapered closets with comfy seats, I don't see the problem.
There's an article by Camille Paglia that she wrote about the decline of sort of emotional intelligence in recent decades. This is a result of the removal of the strict censorship on cinema, and how like these extremely sexually charged romantic relationships were depicted with no nudity at all, and now there is virtually no limits on nudity, and as a result we've returned to these extremely primitive ways of just simply displaying
that's such a good analysis.
Just crude scenes lacking any emotional depth.
TLDR, we want more rope and less short bus. I can't believe I made it through that entire movie. Anyway.
Thankfully, I've never seen it, and it doesn't sound like I should. But you're right, that sort of that lack of emotional intelligence, that lack of subtlety around kind of, we don't need to spell this out, and in many ways we can't spell this out. Let's allow that kind of low-key kind of exploration, and that's what I kind of loved about. I think there's a fair argument that some of the characters in this are quite sort of bluntly drawn. Theo is sort of, she has these horrifying nights in Hill House, and then in the morning she's ever so urbane and witty and sarcastic, and you're kind of like, how? When everyone else is slightly falling apart, and she's like, oh yes, no, I'm just glamorously dressed, and I'm just going to make a sarcastic remark about the evening before. It doesn't quite feel true to life, but at the same time, that sort of subtlety of just, in many ways, the idea of like the people who are looking out for it will go, ooh, she hasn't mentioned the sex of her partner, that's interesting, or just the few other kind of little hints are just enough that you can go, there's something there, without it needing to be like, yes, my gay wife who happens to be a lesbian woman and lives at home with cats, she's papered the bloody hallway without me, and it's awful because she's a woman and I'm also a woman. It's like, yeah, it doesn't need to be like that. I've gone off on a massive tangent.
Well, maybe speaking of characters who get possibly a bit of a short shrift in this, Luke, do you think it's fair to say that he's maybe not drawn as kindly as he is in the novel?
I would say that, I mean, even if it wasn't based on a novel, it's a weak character.
Yes.
It doesn't need to be compared to a good characterization in a novel. There's nothing to him. He is just there to make jokes about how much the family silver's worth.
Yeah.
He's a relative. He's a relative of the owner of the house, and he'll inherit the house. And he's been asked to by his aunt to watch over the experiment.
He's very thinly sketched. I mean, he's got the charisma. Russ Tamblyn obviously had a pretty good career after this. He actually turns up in the in next week's topic. He has an uncredited cameo as Nell's psychiatrist, which we can look forward to. I will screen cap that for you all. But yeah, he's very thin here, and the interesting sort of sideline that he had in the book was taken away from him. So Nell has this sort of infatuation, I think childish maybe would be fair. She feels a bit of a bond with Luke, but then she's jealous and irrational and acts out over, and she's kind of paranoid that Luke is interested in Theo. But
and
a lot
that's
of those
transferred onto Markway. Markway's her infatuation in the film.
Completely. I don't hate that. I think it has a bad effect on Luke because it does make him very thin as a character. But and there's kind of this unfortunate implication that Markway was being dishonest about hiding his marriage, which I didn't get much from. But I did really enjoy that it then sort of echoed Hugh Crane a bit more. So to try and make that a bit clearer, we get the history of the house with Hugh Crane, the sort of domineering, as you would expect, sort of overly restrictive religious architect of the house, master of the house, and the two the shots of the sort of girls who are learning from him under his command, emphasized by the statue as well. And that then feeds in later into shots where Marquet then has Theo and Nell in light clothing that is echoing the shots we saw of the children, and he's towering over them suddenly, and it's almost, it's a reading of they're drawn into the history of the house. They're becoming what the house wants them to be. They're falling into that role, and he's becoming more like the Hugh Crane character, which I thought was a bit interesting. Again, it's nice.
And abandoning them on the death of their mother for his new wives when his wife arrives as well.
Yes. So I thought that was pretty nice, and it was interesting to have Nell fall into that sort of more childlike infatuation. I think someone actually mentioned it up thread about it being a sort of childish. Oh, hello. There you go. That's the one. That's the one I was thinking of. It's an interesting change. I think they got something good out of it. I just think they robbed Luke a bit.
He almost becomes redundant. He doesn't really have a reason to be there anymore.
Yeah, unfortunately.
I think there's possibly only one other reason why he's, like, one of the very, very small reason why he's there, which is that at the start of the film, the aunt warns Marquet, don't play cards with him. He's a card sharp. He cheats at cards. He'll kind of, make sure that he wins. He's sort of, not worth playing against. And then later in the film, and it's very background, and it's just possibly a sort of slight confirmation that there is some supernatural stuff at play. You just see in the background that Theo and Luke are playing cards together, and he gives up in disgust because he keeps losing and she keeps winning. And if he's constantly trying to cheat, then it's sort of, and she can sort of tell that he's cheating and tell what cards he has, then it's proof that she's got those skills she says she does. But at the same time, given that the main conversation in that scene is actually between Nell and Marquet, again, it's from Nell's perspective. So, can you trust it at all? But it just occurred to me that's pretty much the only real role he has in the film is kind of almost as a foil to the other characters, because the other thing is he's the skeptic in this. He's very kind of, I don't believe in anything. I'm just here to make sure the house is okay. and then by the end he does sort of believe. But yeah, it's all very kind of thin and more just for the other characters to bounce off, I would say, which is a shame.
Mm-hmm. He's a lot less brave than Markway. And I noticed, in a way, Eleanor was considerably more brave than Theo. Whenever there was a haunting, it was Eleanor helping Theo.
Yeah.
And it was Markway wanting to go out to find the other people that were lost, whereas he was stay back.
Yeah. He is much more cautious.
I suppose he helps Marquet by being a sort of unflattering point of comparison. Should we talk a bit more about Marquet's wife, who's very drastically changed? I was wondering about your take on
her.
Yeah, well, she's a heck of a lot more sympathetic in the film. Amy, would you like to sort of describe Marquet's wife and, well, I don't know how you'll classify her relationship with Arthur. I certainly had an opinion. If you want to sort of describe how that is in the book.
She's quite dominant. Even in the film, she's dominant. She arrives, announces she's going to stay. I'm going to stay in the most haunted room in their house, and you can't stop me. Not letting anyone stay with her. And in the film, she, during the sort of climactic haunting, goes missing. And she doesn't know how she ends up going missing, but she wandered. The house essentially compels her to wander off. She ends up at the top of a rickety spiral staircase, which Nell climbs up while possessed by the house, and then appears. No one else sees her, and this is the sort of the thing which makes them turn Eleanor away and make her go home. Whereas in the book, there's a seance, and she's extremely skeptical of all of his work. But in the no supernatural experience happens to her, except from her messages in the seance are somewhat similar to Eleanor's. And the impetus for Eleanor being turned away in the book is that she asks Theo if she can move in with her when they leave, because she thinks they're such good friends, and Theo says no.
Yeah, you get this as a sign of it's quite a clear contrast there that Nell is just quite deluded at that point. It's really unescapable. You've got Theo, who's very bohemian, very liberal, but she puts down a hard barrier on Nell moving in.
Like, we're not as good friends as I made it out to be. Whereas instead of having the romantic attachment to Markway and then being devastated that he has a wife, she just wants friendship and like a home, and she's still pivoting between her house, the house, Hill House being the home, and wanting a home outside of the house, which leads to her descent.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm a much bigger fan of her wanting to move in with Theo and sort of running out. It's almost like she runs out of options. Like she thinks she can get a kind of certainty and security in Marquet, and then she's wondering, oh, maybe Luke is interested in me, and then I think she moves on to Theo. Oh, I'll just move in with you, right? She kind of bounces off them all, if I recall.
Theo is the friendship between Nell and Theo in the book is a lot more intimate than it is in the film. The vicious attacks on each other don't start until later on, and Theo is quite instrumental in creating fantasies with Nell, even if they are just playing, because they're away and they've got all this time and space to occupy themselves. They can create fantasies about going for picnics and being cousins, and it's a bit of a joke, and it's like she doesn't quite realize that it is just a joke.
Yeah, I was going to say the cousins reference is it's much more light-hearted for Theo, whereas Eleanor's really responding to it, and it's something that she's never had. Yeah, it's very striking. Back to Marquet's wife, I was thinking the portrayal of, I think your description of her as domineering is great. I think I read that her interaction with, she brings a companion with her called Arthur, who's is he the headmaster of a boys' academy?
I can't remember.
Yeah, he's meant to be very stuffy. He brings a pistol. She brings a planchette, basically like a Ouija board. And they set about things in a very sort of business-like matter. It's quite ridiculous. It's they do seem to fit a lot more with the kind of Jeeves and Wooster style novel, that sort of comedy that you talked about her also writing, Amy. It's it's quite a fun contrast, but then through that, Shirley Jackson does feed you really interesting information, say via the messages they're getting from planchette, from this Ouija board style instrument. And again, it's all filtered with this level of uncertainty that is really interesting. But yes, in this we have a much more sympathetic wife for Marquet, who delivers, I think, it's got to be the best scare of the movie.
It's the only point in which you think you're going to see a ghost. 2 points. When you see her in her nightdress in the car headlights, and then when she comes out of the, like, I didn't recognize her as her. So it was, they're the only 2 points where you think you're going to see a ghost, and it's not a ghost, it's just his wife.
Yeah, her face kind of peering behind the trap door.
It's
seeing that again, my immediate reaction was, oh, that's a corpse. And then she wasn't.
I think we should maybe set the scene a bit. So for people who didn't see this, and again, I implore you, I love this movie. You will enjoy this. This is a massive centerpiece of the movie. This is really iconic. It's kind of inescapable. I believe every adaptation has done this, and the TV series that we're going to cover next week makes a really big deal of this. The spiral staircase is absolutely iconic for this film. We set up some history with it early on. As has happened other times, that info dump of history of the Haunt of Hill House that we get at the start is lovely foreshadowing for what we're going to see going forward, including someone walking up this staircase before they hang themselves. We know it's a place of danger. We see really interesting, intricate camera work. They managed to set up a really small rig on the rail that could go around the outside, which was, they would really struggle to walk a cameraman up there, but they managed to set the camera on a rig on the rail, lower it down the staircase, and then they reversed the footage, which is how they got that lovely shot of the sort of first-person view going up the stairs. But we know it's significant. We know they're dangerous and rickety. And Eleanor, when she's effectively, I don't want to really say possessed, but she's fully sort of sunk into the house. She goes up there.
She's been dancing.
Yes, yeah. She's given over. She's absolutely given over. She goes up the staircase. The others follow. They try and persuade her to go down. Marquet gets her down in the book it's Luke. And you have these agonizing shots of the staircase shaking, the connections to the wall looking extremely fragile. It is very tense. And of course, Eleanor is not, she's not cooperating. Marquet gets closer and she backs off, and you're really wondering if he can do anything to help her. It's feeling incredibly perilous. And it's just when he gets her and is able to sort of bring her a bit back into the current moment, they you relax a bit, classic style. Your tension drops. She's going down, and then suddenly she looks up, and from the trapdoor, you have this. I think I interpreted as a ghost. I felt like we were really seeing a ghost for the first time before we realized, okay, no, sorry, that's Marquet's wife who's gone missing, but she's looking crazed. She's looking disheveled. And it just absolutely caught me. It gave me a fantastic scare.
Sorry, I was just getting distracted about the invention of Ouija boards. Because, yeah, Slim's right. They were marketed as a parlor game from the 1890s, but there's hilarious disputes over copyright when they were first sort of invented. But the sort of planchettes. So you mentioned that the wife brings a planchette with her. Obviously, I haven't read the novel, so I don't know, does she bring a Ouija board? Because sort of planchettes are different. The sort of planchette is the kind of petal-shaped thing that you put your fingers on, and then it points you to the different letters. But they were used in divination. They're sort of more. They've got a longer history than Ouija boards themselves. But basically, sort of, I think the guy who invented Ouija boards basically was like, okay, let's set out all the letters, and then let's get a planchette. That already has this kind of association with the paranormal, or spiritualism, as they'd have called it then, and kind of cobble them all together and then sell it as a family parlor game. And so Ouija boards themselves didn't have that kind of spooky association, but planchettes certainly did. And it's really only latterly, I think, sort of from the sort of 60s or 70s onwards, that Ouija boards themselves have kind of had that like satanic panic branding.
What was the purpose of them then? Was it just to, like, as a family, find random letters?
So it was kind of to tie in. So the sort of late 19th century fascination with spiritualism, with the kind of table turning and sort of speaking to spirits and that kind of thing. It was basically marketed as a fun way to kind of do that as a fun little sort of parlor game that you'd all kind of get out your Ouija. So it's sort of essentially similar to how people would use them now. But I don't think people took them seriously in the way that, like, from the sort of like the 80s onwards, there are all sorts of horror films where Ouija boards function as like a kind of frightening, you'll let the spirits in, you need to close the Ouija board so that spirits don't come in after you. Oh no, now your house is full of demons. They didn't really have that association until much later. They were much more it was much more the sort of Victorian spirit of like, oh, let's just have a fun evening and chat to dead Auntie Dillis, was essentially the approach.
Arthur Conan Doyle intensifies. Yes, she talks about consulting Planchette like he's a mate that she's going to DM. It's quite funny and bizarre, and she just bosses everyone around basically. But I have to go. I simply have to consult Planchette, and she's awful. She's awful.
It wouldn't be a Shirley Jackson novel without a ridiculous, overbearing 50-year-old woman.
I'll look out for it. What's the one I want to read next? Is it We've Always Lived in the Castle? That's the one I want to read next.
There's a lot of Eleanor in Merrycat.
Okay. I'll look out for that. So this centerpiece scene, it's the big scare. It convinces them that basically Nell has to go. It's not safe. They're moving her out, and where is the one I want? Sorry, folks.
They'd spoken about sending her out earlier. He said that there was some kind of hint that they thought she was unhinged, because he said if you were mentally ill, then that would delegitimize my whole experiment. But she
I had forgotten about
promises to
that.
behave herself.
Yes. Oh, that is such a good catch. I had forgotten about that. Yeah. In an unfortunate bit, they are sending her off, saying she just needs to get away from the house. And as we've seen, Nell doesn't have anything but the house, and in a way, she is the house. It's the lives are just too entwined here. She is an echo of the traumas of Hill House. Luke is meant to be with her. In the book, he's not, I recall. They do him dirty. He's meant to be driving with her, escorting her, and instead he gets out at the last minute to get the key for the gate. And Nell comments on how the house has tricked him into getting out of the car. And as we said in our Guinness summary, it'd be great if we're sponsored by Guinness. That'd be epic. Maybe we'll make that happen.
Please drink responsibly.
We'll be patient. All good things to those who wait. So she drives off, and it's this, it's that for you Frankenstein appreciators out there. It is a palindromic construction again. One of the first tragedies we see at the start of the story, the first wife of Hugh Crane, killed crashing into a tree. She crashes into a tree. And the film has a final, just awful little moment, the echo of the hand just in shot after the accident. And Luke is then convinced Hill House is evil. No one should be there. And we get a haunting final. They're all convinced that they need to leave then and there. And there is one haunting shot. It's on screen for about 3 seconds. But if you screen cap it, you have a final unnerving scare. We've paid a lot of attention over the course of the film. We've been directed to look up at the tower, often from a low angle, to build up that it's the hero angle, it's a sense of imposition. But we've been trained to look at that tower, even if we didn't get the full history of it. The filmmakers ensured we would look there. And if we look there again, we see that the house is no longer empty.
Do you have a zoomed in image? Just to really spell it out.
Go on. I can control plus a lot. How about that? It's subtle.
Where's
but if you
that?
look for it, there's
Is there someone standing in a window?
Yep. You've seen lots of the time it's a 2 windows, but now you've got the figure in there.
I see. The last impression I had of the film was when, at the beginning, they explain the entirety of the history of Hill House at Mountway does. And then at the end, he sort of stands by the car crash and he says, Eleanor has died just in the same way the First Lady died. Here is the tree. And he's just sort of like it's in front of his blackboard again. Like,
he does really spell it out again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you get it, guys? Did you get it? Yeah. I tried to point
I'm not
out
sure
the
I did
subtle
get it.
things
Hang on.
in
Could
there.
you run that by me again?
There are some blatant things. There are some subtle things. There's a really subtle, unnerving thing that you can pick up on. You get this palindromic structure is there. It starts with the novel starts with the description of Hill House. It ends with basically the same description. The film starts with that, the wonderful words. Hill House stood for 90 years and might stand for 90 more.
Only in America would that be old.
I know. Oh, get on our level.
I was going to say.
Weak and pathetic. I've got baked beans that have been going longer than that. Anyway,
In the book, it's 80.
Yeah. Well, they make a point here of it's 90 years since the first Mrs. Crane died. And then 90 years later, they take Eleanor. And it might last another 90 years. It's almost like the house is needing to consume someone on that schedule. And it's a subtle thing. It's not massively developed, but it's there for you to pick up on if you want to. But again, this is all part of the sort of echoes of predestination and incorporation in the house, that you're not really your own person. You are tied into the fate of it, which just makes it so much more memorable.
Right from the beginning, she was just speaking about it's her fate. The path is her fate.
Yeah. There was
I was just going to say, there's the sadness of nothing's ever happened to me. This is the first thing that's ever happened to me. But then you almost wonder again. It's that sort of unreliable narrator thing of stuff has happened to her. There was the poltergeist activity when she was a kid, or just stones being thrown at the house. Clearly a significant event, even if she sort of responded to it in a particularly kind of shut down sort of a way. But then it's her mother's died. I don't know. It's that sort of. It's almost another sign that you can't really trust her. That she's sort of saying nothing's ever happened to me. This is the first thing that's ever happened to me. I was like, that doesn't seem true. Sorry, again, I'm coming in with the tangents all the time here.
I guess if she is the house doesn't need to exist that long.
Yeah.
What did you think of the house itself? It's now a luxury hotel where you can get the cozy classic room or the Shirley room, if you fancy staying there. The Shirley room you can access via a lift, so you don't need to go up the cursed staircase.
I don't know.
100% go up that staircase.
I liked it a lot more in the book, where everything was the blue room and the green room and chord like that. That had much more atmosphere.
Yes, and the red top and the yellow top and everything was so bright and colourful, and then this was all black and white.
Yeah.
Although it did make the film more visually striking, I think.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff with the gorgeous statuary of it. We are not going near it, I'm afraid, chat. I know you occasionally like me to suffer on stream, but we're not going to look through the 1999 remake of this, where all the beautiful statuary of the children and the cherubs move in the way that only 1990s CGI can.
No.
Luke gets an even worse show of that. It's was it Owen Wilson? He gets decapitated. Ugh.
We are going to have to watch this. That's my pick for Halloween, and you cannot now dispute me.
There may be some
like a
disputing.
comedy special.
Oh, it's so. Anyway, we're not going near it. I thought the house has wonderful character. I mean, it was shot beautifully. The statuary really helps. It looks so busy. They get a sense of it being disjointed. It's very well set. It's you struggle to place it together and connect the hallways in it. Again, this is something Kubrick uses in The Shining, that you just lose yourself in it. You don't know where everything is. You get lost in it the way the characters do. But at the same time, you get these really memorable bits. So I thought it was very well done. Very well done indeed. It's clearly a lesson that I think they learned in the Mike Flanagan adaptation, that you really have to get the house right. I do prefer the way that one is set out, but obviously they custom built that one. Did you have any thoughts about the design of the house?
This house.
Mm.
I think the fact that it does look so busy, you can believe it inside with all of the, the windowless rooms.
Mm.
The book mentions is it the Westchester Mansion? The woman who was the widowed heiress of Westchester Rifles, I think, who she
Winchester.
That's it. Yes,
House?
Winchester. Yeah. So the sort of mystery house where she kept adding to it because she couldn't stop because she thought it was cursed. And that's referenced in it, and it does have that look to it, like it is just thrown together.
That's true.
Yeah, Horrorshow. Do you know about the Winchester house?
It's ringing a bell.
So they did a film about it a few years
With Judi
ago.
Dench, yeah.
I was going to say it's either Judi Dench or Emma Thompson, who are very different women, but in my head they're the same person. But yeah, so she was the widow of someone in the Winchester Rifles, a sort of famous US make of gun, and she apparently felt so kind of interesting in this era of kind of gun control. But apparently, the legend goes she felt so guilty about the number of people who died because of the sort of the guns that had built the fortune she'd married into. And she believed she was being haunted by the spirits of all these people killed by gun crime. Fascinating. That she...
I think she kept losing her children. Am I making that up? Like she kept losing her children because as punishment. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so she lost a lot of children and all her sort of family members. So she basically ended up very alone and isolated and incredibly wealthy because it was an incredibly wealthy family, and she ended up being the kind of only heir despite having married into the family, and consulted a medium who was basically like, yeah, you need to build a massive house and you need to just keep building it and keep building new rooms because as soon as you stop work on the house, the spirits will get you and they'll kill you. So she started... she started building this house, and it's a real house, and you can go around, and it's sort of genuinely she did work lasted for decades upon decades, and it's just utterly peculiar things like kind of windows from some rooms open into internal hallways in other parts of the house, but they look like they're outside until you kind of realize that, oh no, that's looking down into that room, but then how do I get into that room? Where does this door go? That door goes nowhere. These stairs just lead into the just space. It's apparently utterly peculiar, and people just working on it, sort of until she died, basically. And I think it's now it's sort of then, I don't know who owns it now, but for a while it was used for kind of massive parties that the sort of wealthy elite of the local towns would sort of just ship people out on trains to come and party in the Winchester house. But yeah, I mean, the Americans in the chat are telling more about it, but it just sounds like an utterly lunatic place. And I don't think I believe in ghosts and hauntings and things, but the fact that she believed it, you can tell, because she just went completely mental with the building because she'd been told that would somehow sort of break this curse. So yeah.
Well, that is. I'll be interested. I think I want to check if that story is actually. That film is actually about that. That'll be interesting. But I would suggest to stay on the right side of Super Nanny. We should probably round it off tonight, as this isn't going to be the last we deal with.
Sorry to butt in. It is neither Judi Dench nor Emma Thompson. It is the amalgamation of the two that is Helen Mirren.
Oh. Okay. Acceptable. Very acceptable. Yeah.
As Proper Horror Show was saying, next week we will be reviewing the 1999 version of this film with Liam Neeson in it.
No. Absolutely disavow, please.
Yes,
this is a family.
I'm in.
This is a family friendly stream, people. Come on. Although, I know, maybe we'll do a trash watch once. It is my Christmas tradition to review something utterly abscess-inducingly awful. But I do have one in mind. So, but we'll see how we go. Next week, we are covering the 2019 adaptation of The Haunting of Hill House, which retains the full name. It does not shorten it to simply The Haunting. It is by channel favourite Mike Flanagan. And I have been warning you for about 4 weeks we're going to cover it. So I hope you have been getting your watch in, and I hope you have been really enjoying it. Although if you've been watching it, I'm pretty certain you will have been. As I forewarned you, it's a 10-part series, so there's a lot to do, and it is an incredibly, gosh, how can I say? It takes great liberties with a story whilst harvesting the book for elements and inspiration to update it. It is a very creative adaptation. I'm going to be really interested in what you thought of it, Amy. Have you started watching it? Are you all the way through, or I was just wondering about like it.
I haven't started watching it yet, but I will be able to watch it in time. I have tried to watch it when it first came out, and I fell asleep and woke up 3 episodes later. So.
Oh bless!
Oh no!
Darn you, Netflix autoplay! Gosh darn it!
I'm not great with long serious things. I definitely like the short and ridiculous. I don't have much of an attention span.
No worries. If you can, well, I won't drop any spoilers. You get as far as you can, and I'm really going to. So much is different, but you can just see elements that were taken, and that I'm gonna have a good time. It's gonna be a good one. Up. Yeah. All right. But if I go on to that, we will definitely incur the wrath of Super Nanny. So I would probably start rounding things off now. So as we should, oh gosh, how can I forget? We should do scores and closing thoughts. See, without TCG here to keep me on the straight and narrow, I just wander off. So we are still using our patented, fairly inexplicable score out of 12 burgers scoring system, which really doesn't fit well when we're doing a wonderful film that we want to take seriously. But yes, Waifu, would you like to give your score using our excellent out of 12 burgers system?
I think it's probably a 10 out of 12. And I'm knocking off a couple of burgers for just certainly the beginning. Some of the scenes felt quite stilted. So it felt quite artificial, just some of the delivery. And I don't know whether that's just a stylistic aspect of the time or just the way the director tends to be, but it sort of took me out of it at the start. But throwing on all the trimmings and kind of an extra side of buffalo cauliflower wings, because just it's still, when I first saw it, apart from the two things that technically count as horror films that I'd seen before, I'd never watched a horror film, and it got me then. And the fact that I've massively kind of increased my horror tolerance, as it were, and yet still last night, properly going down to, sort of close up for the evening, I was just genuinely like watching around corners and convinced I was going to get got by ghosts. Yeah, it's a darn good film. So 10 out of 12, if not higher.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'm quite happy with that. Amy, would you like to give a score and closing thoughts?
I'm going to give it a 7 out of 12 based. I don't have a method of giving things ratings. I just kind of go on what I feel like, and I feel like it's a 7, and I feel like I'd need to rewatch it, and it would go up if I rewatched it. But at the moment, it's a 7.
I think that's fine. That's fine, and would probably say it does get better on the rewatch. Just because you see the things that are laid up for it. That's fair. So we have a 10 and we have a 7. I'm seeing reasonably there is another 7 there in the chat from Mergoot. Otherwise 9s and 11s. Untorn. And Nell and her hysterics are a bit hard to connect with. Luke is quite thin, and I really miss. I don't know. I miss Mrs. Marquay. I found her really interesting in the novel, and there were some scenes outside that I would have loved them to have included, but nevertheless, we always have to do a more concise retelling. Still. There's a lot of depth to this, a lot of intelligence, some really great design, and it's very influential. I think I probably end up probably more on a 9. I think maybe with a sort of stronger score, I would have tipped into the 10s. So that's probably about where I'd go. I'm going to go with a 9. Shockingly, I have to report TCG was not appreciated. He did do his homework, and he did send the score, but it was 4. He gave it a 4. So just reading out his feedback: 4 burgers out of 12. The women characters were insufferable, and the backing music was ill-fitting. See, he picked up on the music as well, and overwhelming in parts, disrupting the dialogue. The premise was interesting and very old-timey. I wish all paranormal investigators were like the main chap. So astute. So we didn't win TCG over, unfortunately. Never mind.
DJ has made a good point. None of us mentioned Mrs. Dudley, and we should have done.
Yeah, I think we probably should quickly. I found her quite odd. The first time I watched it, I had the impression like she was some kind of paid stooge, like she was a setup. Like Markway had paid her to be creepy and weird to build the atmosphere. Did you have that vibe?
It was yes. It was very ridiculous. She's just kind of there to, no one will hear you if you scream.
She's kind of like, in a way, she helps the reading of this as like a commentary on the traditional, or like the slightly schlocky ghost stories, because she is so over the top. Well, that's a nice solid 10 burger rating there. Nice. I'm glad you liked it, Henry. Yeah. It's an odd fit. We get a much more interesting Mrs. Dudley in next week's. And Mr. Dudley was such a grump as well. That was the thing you pointed out, waifu. That Nell comes in, she's really rude to Mr. Dudley, and she gloats at him, and then she drives off in a huff when he's annoyed back at her.
Yeah, she kind of drives through the gate, pauses to kind of smugly say something to him, and then gets snippy with him for coming over to talk to her. And I'm like, madam, make your mind up. Typical woman. But it just, I suppose that kind of ties into this idea of, if she is, it's not that the house makes her weird, it's that she is already kind of quite disordered in many ways. She kind of starts off as she means to go on, really.
She speeds up and drives at him. It looks like she's going to run him over.
Yeah. I can see why the sister didn't want her to have the car, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay, folks. Well, we've done our scores and closing thoughts. You already know the homework for next week. We are covering 2019's The Haunting of Hill House by Mike Flanagan. So finish that off if you have not finished it off. Start it if you have not started. You may need to binge, but the first time we watched this, I think we binged the last 5 episodes all together in a bit of a frenzy. So you might not struggle to do that. I want to reiterate thanks to Amy. Really great having you on the stream. There's one thing I meant to ask you. Sorry, I talked over you there.
It's okay.
There's something I meant to ask you at the beginning, and I kind of forgot. I usually, when someone makes their debut, I like to ask them about the kind of horror films they'd like. So maybe we'll talk about that a bit more next week. But just so we've asked on stream, what would you say your favourite horror movie is?
My taste in film and TV is extremely lowbrow. So I'm gonna go with it's not even a horror film, but I'm gonna call it a horror film because it has all of the sort of plot lines and aesthetics of a horror film, although it is definitely not a horror film. And I'm gonna go with The Little Shop of Horrors, which is my favorite film in general.
Oh,
I mean, it is about an alien plant invading America and like destroying and eating everyone. So I'm gonna go with it.
You're in good company. Poe absolutely loves that movie as well.
It's perfect.
Yeah, I'll take. Yeah, that is absolutely grand. No problem there. All right. Well, I've got links to your channel in the description where people can. I think you do have a nice video on Shirley Jackson, don't you?
No, I am working. I'm working on 3 on Shirley Jackson. I'm working on one on her domestic comedies, one on her like domestic horrors, and then one on a brief correspondence she had with a pen pal, a friend who she made, who was originally a like a fan, and they sort of sparked up a friendship called Gian Beatty, and recently the correspondence that Shirley sent her were found in a barn, and so they've been published. So I'm gonna make 3 videos on covering like all sides of her work.
Oh, fantastic!
In the works.
We'll be shilling those when those are out, absolutely. And of course, people can find you on Women's Hour most weeks, can't they?
Yes, on Poe the Person's channel on Friday at 9:00.
Excellent. And waifu occasionally turning up on there as well?
Very intermittently. I've been on once and got called a communist. I'm still annoyed, but I will be back.
Yeah, all right. So quit complaining, Pinko. Honestly. All right. Well, we are still in Super Nanny's good graces, so I will sign off while we are still in that state. I have a suspicion that we will not manage that next week. There is a lot to cover.
Trying to cover a 10-episode series in one night. I think I might just decamp to my parents for the weekend and come back when you're done after like a 78-hour stream.
Well, suffice to say, we are not going to go chronologically through the plot.
That Guinness summary is going to be very overpowered.
Oh my gosh. It'll be like the elevator full of blood, but with Guinness. Anyway, I will sign off. I am going to reiterate thanks to Amy and to Waifu. It's been an absolute pleasure. And you again, Amy, thank you so much for putting together notes on Shirley Jackson. That was really helpful.
My pleasure.
And great observations. Like you have a much firmer understanding of her work than either of us, and I think it really helped understand this a little better.
Thank you.
And thank you, chat, keeping it nice and lively. Great contributions as well. I'm really glad you guys responded to this. makes me very happy when we reach way back into older films and people really respond well to them. It's very uplifting. I'm so pleased to see it. I hope you enjoy next week's just as much. It's a massive favourite of mine. It is easily in my top 10, but we will cover it then. So I will sign off and say thanks, y'all. Tschüss.